Okay, the time is 6:04. We will go ahead and begin our workshop. I will turn it over to Abby with Mel Foster.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's a pleasure to see you all today again. Thank you so much for having us. We'll get started really quickly, but my colleague Seth Otto is joining us from Portland. Hey, Seth.
Hi, Seth.
Apologies that we couldn't both be here in person, but hopefully for May and June we'll be able to do that. So Seth will be leaning in on a number of items on the workshop today. So we'll hear from him as well. Seth, anything that you'd like to add as we get started?
Not really, Abby, but thanks for everyone's flexibility and accommodating me joining remotely. I hit by a bug late yesterday and still recovering, but glad I can join this way.
Me too.
Thanks, Seth. Okay, I'm going to bring up my screen here. If I can bring up our PowerPoint. Okay. Everybody see that okay? Everybody remote can see that?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. This is the fourth workshop, so we're just going month to month here. As we typically do, we will talk through the findings from the previous month. So what was asked of us in March, we'll walk through some of that. And at any point, of course, commissioners, if you have questions, you have additional information you'd like, if you want to take a deeper dive, either now or in a future workshop, just let's have that discussion and have that openness and conversation. We will have a discussion after we go through the findings. We have a lot of findings today to discuss. What's next? So what priorities do you want to focus on? What pieces of the priorities we've been talking about would you like to focus on, go a little deeper on? What do you want to see in the next workshop? And then we'll talk about those next steps and then adjourn. Just as a reminder, as we typically do, this is where we are in the timeline. The star kind of shows where we are. The green diamonds are deliverables. So we, in late January, early February, delivered a communications plan. And then in September, we plan to deliver a final report that helps to inform a future comp plan update. And again, as a reminder, these are the priorities that were discussed in the memo that you received and were researched over the last month and that we're going to talk about today. Now, you may notice that workforce is not in your memo, and that was something that we talked about. There was a suggestion that perhaps we talk with WSU and understand better what is it that brings an extension to a community and what does that look like and how does it work? We did reach out to WSU and it took us a couple of tries to find the right folks. And we will be talking with them next week. So unfortunately, we weren't able to bring it to you today, but we do plan to bring that to the next workshop.
Well, and can I add just real quick that, and I missed the second one, but there were 3 Facebook posts this week from businesses that were closing because they didn't have workers. I think Chief Springs was today, Monday and Tuesday, they were closed because they didn't have staff. I don't remember the second one. And then today it was Waitsburg Grocery said they'll be closing every day earlier because they don't have staff. Just keeps going on and on.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll start with the Columbia Walla Walla rail line. So as you directed us or asked us last month, we spoke with Paul, is it Dedelius? I pronounced that correctly? Thank you, Paul. We spoke with Paul. We spoke with a court district in Washington, and we spoke with a city in Washington that had sold or transferred track. To understand a little bit better why they did that, what was the process, and then when we spoke with Paul, understanding his interest in this, his business case, and his view of ownership of the track. A couple of just kind of big picture takeaways. We share the major takeaways from each of those interviews here, but big picture wise, it's very apples and oranges when it comes to the transfer and sale from the port and the city that we spoke with. So not as comparable or not exactly comparable to the asset that you own here, but very interesting to hear how different entities are looking at that and their recommendations. So there were some good recommendations from the city particularly, as they would probably, the process was actually quite similar to what you would likely go through as a board. So some really good information there. So takeaways from speaking with Paul, he has a regional view of this opportunity and this track. So looking at it not from just the Dayton area or just Columbia County, but really this section of Washington, this part of Washington. And it is part of the national network, of course, and so it all ties into that. There is long-term potential seen in the ag industry, of course, not surprising, I don't think, to any of us, and also future industrial development around the region. There is, as we know, investment required. So there's a significant investment that is needed, whether, no matter who owns it, to bring it to a point where it could support additional freight traffic and grant funding availability. So we talked about that because just like public entities, private entities can also get grant funding, and that may be a piece of the funding puzzle. The Washington Port District that we spoke with had a short section of last mile track, so a very small piece of track. I'm trying to remember it. I feel like it was like
You said a half
mile,
mile.
half a mile. Yeah, it was half a mile. So again, this is sort of a different situation versus a 38-mile section that's connecting communities. So a little bit different, but for them, it wasn't a return on investment issue. So they were putting money into it. It wasn't returning that money to them. And so they enacted a transfer to a private owner operator. And that was, if I can remember, I get the city and the port mixed up when I recall the interviews. Even though it doesn't seem like it was that long ago.
Feels like we had like 14 interviews.
I
this
know,
month.
I know. Oh, they did, they had a state audit, and so that was confirmation for them, that was part of their process. And that owner operator has successfully operated the track, so everything is good there. The city had they actually continue to own a rail asset. They had two different rail assets. The one that they sold was more lightly used, and it was outside of the city limits, and it was kind of a historical piece of track. The background was that it was purchased originally to ferry folks by rail to Mount Rainier. And then, cars happened. And folks said, well, maybe I'd like to go on my own time and not follow a train schedule. So it wasn't as heavily used as their other section of track, which actually runs to a local port. And again, it was sort of an ROI piece there too. It was taking a lot of investment, it wasn't returning that investment for the long term that they saw. And so they went through the federal process with the Surface Transportation Board. They did the surplus process and they sold it. They did conduct that through direct negotiation because their policy allowed for that. They talked about, you could do an RFP. That's another way to go.
But they did have appraisals.
They did have
Yeah.
appraisals, yep. And they appraised it as a going concern and as I'm gonna forget the term, Jenny. The other,
I don't remember the words.
but they looked at two different aspects of that when they appraised it as value.
It's the same words that the consultant or the appraiser we talked to, remember the thing I put in your packets, it's the
Right.
same words.
What's interesting,
yeah.
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, I'll look while you talk.
Thank you. What I thought was interesting about this is that they maintain ownership of the right of way. And that allows them to collect revenue from the presence of utilities, which, as you heard earlier, the city is interested in running utilities down the rail line here. So that was sort of a nice consistency. And let's see what else. Oh, and they also go ahead.
No, sorry, I need to stop doing that.
False alarm.
Yeah,
They had some great recommendations. So when you're looking at it, understand the role of the Surface Transportation Board, their oversight role as well as basically an approval role of moving an asset forward like that. Legal counsel with specific experience in rail assets was key for them and with the Surface Transportation Board as well. And then community engagement. So they did some community engagement, but there was some unexpected pushback because of the public's interest in that community and having a trail on the rail line. And so they were very specific about making sure that you're reaching out early and often to the community.
I wrote down going concern and net value. I don't think that's the same word our consultant used, but net value, and then it was somewhere in between the price they determined. They settled on.
So those are the big takeaways, some, similarities, but also some big differences in the folks that we talked to. So I want to pause there and, answer your questions if any.
Well, I see a lot of similarities and differences, between the people you talk to and the situation that we have. And I think that's probably gonna be pretty typical in the railroad business, that every different short line is going to have its unique challenges and benefits and constraints and issues. One of the key similarities I did see is both of these tracks were underutilized and were costing a lot to maintain for not very much return on investment, which is, similar to where we're at. That we don't, we really don't get a lot of lease revenue off of this for what it takes to take care of it. So I do see similarities and an advantage of working towards for sale for that purpose. Yeah, there's a big difference between a half mile or a mile long track and 37 miles of rail line, but almost, well, 2/3 of it is out of our county anyways. And so, a big majority of the rail line isn't even in our county. So there's a similarity to that, to where Tacoma, sold part of theirs because it wasn't even in the city limits. So there are similarities and there's differences, and I think it's worth, continuing to explore more on that. I did start looking into the Surface Transportation Board and trying to understand what their role is in all this, and if they're just more of a reporting agency or if they need to be involved through the entire process and approval and whatnot. So I'm looking into that. I'm hoping to be able to speak with some of the other ports that have short lines during the spring conference. Those conferences are good times for networking and talking to other people and seeing what they have to say. That's really my comments on that part of it. I do have some information I would like to go over with you guys, but I'll let you guys have some input first.
Yeah. We're talking about it.
So I had Jenny forward this to you. This is from the American Short Line Regional Railroad Association, and it's a handout on facts and figures about short line railroads. I found it really interesting. A lot of things I really didn't even know. One of the things that was of interest to me was in 1980 that the Staggers Act was passed that reduced a lot of the choking restrictions that were put on railroads. And prior to that, a lot of the short line railroads were just being shut down, and the class ones weren't using them, and they were basically just letting them go. And after the Staggers Act, reducing the regulations and overbearing government restrictions and opening the industry up to, free market, it's steadily increased in its economic impact and its use, and basically it essentially saved the short line railroad industry. So this is mainly for your guys' information. I'm not going to go into detail about a lot of it, but there's charts and graphs that show how the railroad use has improved and increased over the recent years. But one of the key takeaways that I did notice throughout this is there's a pie chart on page 8 that shows the short line railroad miles, the total miles of short line railroad that are operated by what type of, in what category. And government agencies only operate 7% of the total short line railroads in the United States. On the following page, it talks another pie chart about the total number of railroads, these are the actual rail lines, not the miles of ownership, and government only owns about 5% of the total number of short line railroads. And I think that opening up the railroads to the free market is what has saved that, and government being overly involved in them is problematic to their success. My goal through any of this process with the asset that we have, especially specifically this railroad, is that railroad stays as an operating and working asset for this community. Like I said before, I'm not interested in the port having ownership to say, yeah, look at all the all the roads we have on the monopoly board. I'm interested in this excellent, spine running through our county and linking us to the national network to be preserved and to continue to be able to operate. And I see the best opportunity for that to be in the public market, or in the private market, I'm sorry. Because, the free market and the free enterprise that they can do, I think, is a lot better than what we can do with it. There was also an article I read. I'm gonna read a couple of highlights to you if I can find it here 1 second. And this is in a production called Freight Wave, and they cover interstate commerce, global commerce, and transportation of goods and services or goods across the globe. And this article is titled "Short-Line Railroads Offer an Appealing Investment Opportunity Even Amid the Pandemic," and it was dated back in 2020. And a couple of the key takeaways is it's talking about all the funding opportunities that there are in private investment and grants and federal grants and state grants that are available for private industry and for the private sector of the railroads. Bear with me as I get down to. So this article talks about all the different short line railroads that are being exchanged and bought and sold. I'm not finding what I'm looking for. Anyway, I'm not going to waste my time on a lot of that, but I can forward this article to Jenny. She can email it to you, but it's got good information about all the funding sources and the things that are out there and available to the private sector and their investment in the railroads. So yeah, take a few minutes when you get some time and look over those and what you think about that. But that's all I had on that. So I'll let you guys talk now.
So I did some reading too. I found the Washington State Short Line Rail Inventory and Needs Assessment. This came out in 2015, so it's a little outdated. But I found a lot of information on this if you have the opportunity to read that. Once again, to echo what Seth has indicated, I am hopeful that if a sale occurs, that rail line stay in place. I mean, we don't want it to go away.
Right.
Absolutely. What's interesting on this was that WPPA Chris Herman is listed as the project team member to this report while he was with WSDOT.
That's where I first met him. Yeah, he worked for Freight Rail.
Yeah. So I contacted him during our last meeting, and I too am interested in speaking with Benton and Royal Slope, is it? Those two, the other one is Tacoma, I think it is.
Yes, Tacoma was the city and the two ports. I think you reported on Royal Slope last
We
time,
did.
right? Yes.
Right. So I asked the same question that I asked you at the last meeting. Would an owner operator of a short line railroad have more opportunities, such as different sources, et cetera, to apply for grant funding than a public entity like ourselves? And he replied, generally speaking, there are far more grant opportunities for the port to pursue than for the operator. He was operator owner. Before we make a final decision on whether to sell or not, I would love to talk or have an opportunity for Chris to speak to.
Well, funny you should mention that, because when he called today about the short line thing, I asked if he would be interested in speaking to the commission.
Yes.
So if you want me to, I can invite him to.
Again,
Speak at a meeting.
that's way down the line.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure.
I don't know that, I mean, we're not deciding whether to sell or not during this process. It's just to.
She's trying to help give you
Yes.
information, yeah.
Okay, so some of the things in here, of course, as is known by so much, that we've already heard. hmm,
And so and did you bring copies or do you want me to send it to them
You've
electronically
already seen
or?
this?
I may have, but I would like to.
Yeah, it's, I did not make copies. It's 95 pages.
Well, I can email it, the link to
Yeah.
them.
The link.
Yeah, and I'm sure I can find it because I remember being part of that, participated in it in some way.
June 2015.
Okay, I'll write that down.
Right. As we've all heard, much of the existing short line rail system in Washington state does not meet the state's current or future capacity and velocity needs for efficient operation. For example, over 55%, more than 700 miles are less than 112-pound rail. The recommended way to efficiently operate the size of the 286,000-pound rail cars that are the class 1 railroads. So of the Washington State Rail Line Railroads, I don't know if I should read this if you're going to be sending it out.
Well, just the highlights and then we
Okay,
can, well,
I
we
will
should
talk
move
real
on,
quickly.
yeah.
Of the short line railroads in Washington state, 50% are privately owned, 50% are publicly owned, for a total of about 1,300 miles, just for interest.
Mhm.
So 50-50,
And that's just short lines?
short line, just short line.
So like Seth's thing, it's just short lines, okay,
Right,
just checking.
right. The other highlights. And again, we've talked about the significant cost to repair or bring that infrastructure up to workable standards. Would cost, on 19 of the 22 lines in the state, the overall infrastructure investment need for more than 700 miles is approximately $610 million. That's a big number. Again, I guess I'm talking about the numbers. In the back of my mind, I keep thinking it would be far easier for the port to help in obtaining the grant funding to than for a public owner operator to get the funding. That's
Private.
private, yes. So, again, 95 pages. Jenny will send you the link. I think it's fascinating study to read. But again, I would love to talk to Chris Sherman on
Okay,
that.
I will make sure it's on the list. And you can put it in the report,
Yes,
yeah.
got it, yeah. Commissioner Watts, any additional thoughts you want to share?
I'm chewing on all this in my skull right this second. Be interested to see what the new infrastructure bills that have been put forth from the federal government in the last year. What impact that would have on that particular asset. Type deal, so what was allocated for some of those things and opportunities there.
That could be part of your funding increase.
We're going to talk about funding toward the end. So thank you. Okay.
Job, guys, thank you.
Anything
Guys
else?
and girls.
Anything else? Jenna?
Nope, no, nothing,
Great, thank you.
no comment.
Okay, next item is Blue Mountain Station. So at the last workshop, we talked about terminology.
Mhm.
And you know, some of the things we talked about was with rebranding, and honestly, rebranding is a lot more than what you call something. And so I don't think that, I'm positive that you don't need a rebrand of Blue Mountain Station. But what was discussed was sort of semantics around what is it called? It's currently called an artisan food market. There are some concerns about the connotations of that term and how it makes people feel in the community. And so what we did is we looked at some markets around the region and specifically in Washington State that share traits with Blue Mountain Station. What are they called and what is the connotation generally in the zeitgeist, so to speak, of what they are? We looked at 5 different terms. Public market, farmers market, makers markets, locally sourced, and farm to table, which are, I think, terms that you generally hear around both food and beverage and arts and crafts. And so public market, you know, think of your Pike Place, your Pybus, They're typically a permanent and year-round site, although they do often have a seasonal aspect, particularly for the produce. It's a very carefully structured system of independent businesses. And it's very much focused on tourism. So bringing in folks to the community to participate in the public market. And you tend to have a mixture of food, beverage, crafts, entertainment, some vendors that, you know, do different kinds of entertainment, clothing. So it can be a real mix. And we have some obviously very big prominent public markets in Washington, particularly in Pike Place is like, as we're like researching this, Pike Place just comes up consistently top, you know, 2 or 3, which is kind of fun. Farmers markets usually are very seasonal. So we have one, we actually have a couple in the communities that I live in. So I work in Vancouver, but live out in the Battleground area. We have a couple of farmers markets and they're only on from like late spring to early fall or late summer, sometimes depending on the weather. They are local, so very much local. So you're not drawing from probably outside of 50 miles, honestly. And small batch and handmade. So that is a consistency with Blue Market or Blue Mountain Station. Farmers markets they abound, I would say. There are a lot of them. But it's our understanding that they've not been successful here. So that's a little bit of just a point that I wanted to make that has been tried before and hasn't necessarily been successful. But it looks like maybe there's some knowledge of that.
Yeah, it's just, it's so unfortunate, but it's almost like there's just not enough bodies in this town to make it worth a farmer sitting there for 6 hours with their eggs to make $50. And that was part of the reason that the co-op started, was because they sell so many local products, but the farmer doesn't have to sit there.
Right.
So it has a farmer's market element, but it's almost more like I don't even know,
And
local food store, local food.
it just has
Yeah.
a lot of limitations, I think, that make it.
It's just, yeah,
difficult.
we're just so, I mean, and I mean, the last time they tried was when Brad was at the chamber and they advertised and they had music and they had food and but still people didn't make enough money. No, it was really disappointing.
I think you maybe have to have either a huge draw for that or a bigger population base to make it
Right.
successful.
Well, and doing it like on a Saturday or something, so many people unfortunately drive to shop in Walla Walla,
Mhm.
other
Yeah.
places, that it was that was hard too.
Makers markets, those are more focused on arts and crafts. And you're finding these, I mean, actually, there were quite a bit more examples than I expected to see. But you're really typically talking about things that people make and not so much things that people grow. A great example of this is a Pybus, where they have pop-up stalls, where it's advertising space, it's maker space. They actually can make the products there and they sell it right in the same quite small location. And there's multiple ones and people kind of come and go as they have products. And
What
it's
do you mean by
really interesting.
advertising space?
So it's the place where they can have their materials up. So, you know,
Oh, like,
temporary signage or
Oh,
flyers or, you know, handouts or any kind of like information about what's being made there. And you often see people crafting there, making the object there and selling it. It's really neat if you get a chance. I don't know if anybody's been to Pybus, but yeah, it's very cool. Sometimes they're seasonal as well. So you get those, sometimes like pop up around the holidays. And then, they're also sometimes sources of educational opportunities and community for makers. Locally sourced is more of a connotation to the product itself than it is the location. So it's not as much like placemaking as it is about the product. So where did it come from? You tend to hear this more directly related to food. So you'll see it on, you know, menus and grocery stores, signs. I mean, even Walmart will say that locally sourced. And I believe, what was it? Within 400 miles, which how local is local? But that's the
Yeah.
USDA's definition of local when it comes to locally sourced food. Farm to table was the last name that we looked at the last term. And that is really more related to a movement You often see this in restaurants or like really small businesses that maybe sell like a couple of different products. I'm trying to remember where I was. Just not too long ago. Where was I? I was out on the central Washington or the mid Washington coast. So Copalis, Mill Clips, kind of that area, Quinault. And I drove past a farm to table. It's like a storefront and they sold two products. They had baked goods and they had fresh milk. That was it. And it was obviously from a farm near, there's a lot of farmland out there. Surprisingly, it was our first time out there. There's a little bit of skepticism around this term. This originated in the 60s, 70s, and there was a lot of overuse and even some fraud related to it. That's kind of gone away, and there are a lot of really great examples of traceable food that is truly farm to market. And you've got an amazing one here locally. I'm gonna get the name right. It's Montier Fromagerie. So the cheese makers, and they have a goat farm and they raise their goats and they milk them and they make the cheese right there. And is it sold at the Mountain Station? Yeah, I thought so.
Consignment, yeah.
Yep. And they also host farm to table events, so dinners that you can actually go to on their farm. That is really what we came up with, different kinds of terms, ways they can be used. Commissioners, interested in your thoughts.
So of those, in your opinion, which would be a better, maybe not better, but of these terms, which would be the best match for what we're trying to do out there?
Well, you know your community best. I think there's at least two pieces to this. One is what are you actually doing? And the other is how does your community feel about it? And what resonates with them? From the discussion that we've heard, there seems to be an interest in local and fresh, accessible. People feel like they're buying from their neighbors, right? And I think that's what I'm hearing. And what feels close to that is public market, because it's open to the public. Anyone can be a vendor. It's a permanent site and you have a mixture of goods there.
Right.
Now, it doesn't necessarily fit the sort of, sometimes the vision of a public market is larger, but it doesn't fight it either.
I would have picked public market also, Jeannie.
Good.
Is that what you thought?
Oh, yeah, I've liked that for a while, but so I'm glad to hear that I didn't think the
No,
opinion.
no, I did not hear you. I did not hear you.
No,
say
I've actually, before this discussion ever came up, I had thought about changing the
Mhm.
sign on that building potentially to public market.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't change that it's artisan and it doesn't change that it's artisan way, but it's because people say, I don't know what it is. And it's like, okay, if it says public market, they'll understand that they can come and look and they can go in the co-op. And if the tasting rooms are open, they can have a taste and, so I kind of like that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the number of people who have said, artesian market, what the heck is that? And they say, "No, it's not artesian."
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I
What do you guys think?
actually had to look up the definition of artesian.
Of artisan?
Artisan?
Or artisan, yeah.
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 And,
Both are your one.
Yeah.
I thought I had an idea what it was, but, I was like, oh, I better find out for sure what that actually is. So I like public market
Okay.
myself.
Good.
Okay. Especially out of that, mix, and there's not really a whole lot of other mix that I'd say, I mean. It sounds good to me. I would say it opens it up.
Yeah.
More than narrows the scope,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yep,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that.
great. Well, that was,
I think a lot of people, like, we discussed that towards the very end of last meeting, is that everything in there is organic, and I'm thinking, no, that's not the case, and initially, when we started
that
the
was what
co-op,
the consultant
That's-
said, organic and natural, but
That's really-
it's really local that people care about more
I mean,
than
it
anything else,
was
and it's
in-
not all organic.
And you get down to local, you get
yes,
in the big city, people think of local as 400 miles. You get down to a small town and then the mentality changes and people think local, well, that has to come from my town. And
Yes.
It's really not that
Yeah.
way. It's more of a
Exactly.
Right,
regional
Yep.
resource
exactly.
Yep.
product, but
If you do have it where it's public market, then you can have all of those things within it,
Yes,
Right.
and it still makes sense.
yes.
The other thing that I would say that's great about public market, that it's placemaking. which I think is something that Blue Mountain Station does.
Mhm.
And placemaking is sort of that, it's hard to quantify, but it's like an identity almost,
Mhm.
which I think that with the products you have here, you're branding the community with the public market too. Fresh, local,
Mhm.
the stuff you have there is beautiful, and just amazing products.
Well, like, I think you wouldn't believe how much soap they sell there, from the two local soap makers,
Really?
from Biker Bees and, yeah, Biker Bees and, you know, because Azure started there and then they opened their shop downtown, but they still sell their soap at the market, and you just wouldn't believe how much they sell. It's crazy. People stop for it. So, but that, I mean, the co-op's just one spot in the whole building, but yeah. Great, well, that's good. Well, we'll work on, following up on that then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, related sort of to the Blue Mountain Station campus is housing, and I am going to turn it over to Seth to kick us off there.
Right, so housing generally, and in particular affordable housing, has been flagged up as a need within the community. Specifically to accommodate a workforce that seems to be in short supply. So we looked at the available property that the port owns currently. These are about 8 acres on 2 parcels adjacent to the Blue Mountain Station campus off Highway 12. Both zoned agricultural residential 1, which does allow for multifamily and single family development in somewhat limited density. And in particular, due to the lack of sewer available out there, it does limit the total amount of units that could be placed on the property. But there's a water line that runs down 12 that we assume could be connected to the property, although we have not had a chance to investigate that. And there would some engineering would be recommended for that. It's our understanding that wastewater will not be connected outside of the city unless the property is annexed into the city. So, and there's,
May I correct you, Seth? I'm sorry, we didn't talk about this ahead of time. If it's in the urban growth area, it can connect to city sewer.
okay, well, that,
And that is in the urban growth area. So
okay,
in our big Blue Mountain Station plan for the development agreement for the 21 acres, we have a utility, I don't know, an element that talks about extension of utilities. So what that part, those 2 parcels would do is they just have to be part of that extension. So there is the possibility of city sewer.
okay, it just needs to go through multiple other properties that are
Yes.
in the way and unconnected. I will say, just for the record, the information we got from the county is that sewer would not be extended without annexation, so we'll have to clear that up with the county planners.
Really?
Yeah.
Who did you speak with?
You know, it was Garrett that made the call and reported
Okay.
back to me, so I'll find that out.
Yeah, because we worked really hard a couple of years ago to get that property put into the urban growth area for that reason, so.
Yeah, they could just be misinformed. It's what was reported back was that without annexation, so.
Got it, okay.
But if sewer is extended there, that changes the story quite a bit. The available density goes up from 1 unit per acre to divisible lots of up to, I think it's, or down to 7,200 square feet or in that neighborhood. And so on 8 acres, you can get approximately 40 units, which is a significant number. Otherwise, without sewer, under the current sort of setup of utilities and zoning on that property, you would have 1 unit per acre, and so netting out roads and other easements and things on the property, you would wind up with about 7 units. So short term, I think 7 units possible on the property. Long term, with an extension of sewer, up to about 40. So significant difference.
40 on the whole 8 acres.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Seth, may I weigh in for a second?
Please.
Thank you. I know this is just information that we're sharing with the commission as you are thinking about where the port is going. We discussed previously, ports are not under the RCW, precluded from doing housing, but they're also not, it's also not in your powers under the RCW. So that's a consideration. How courts tend to do housing today is they either partner or they sell. There may be gray areas related to workforce housing. So I just wanted to bring that to our attention, since we are talking about workforce and it is such an important issue. That's an important nexus for courts that are thinking about doing housing. The other piece of this that's really important is understanding what it is your community needs and desires. So those are really two different things. So we talked before about housing in Columbia County and in Dayton particularly. That it's not a quantity issue necessarily, it's more of a diversity issue of types of housing. So there's really no transitional housing, there's not a lot of multifamily, there are a lot of single family homes and a lot of older homes. And so that is a challenge that you're seeing right now. And so understanding the needs for housing within the community and then what the community actually would like to see and bringing those together. And some of that work can be done with your partners. Right, so regional partners, and then of course the city and the county as they look at zoning and as they look at, where the future of the larger community is going.
If we did want to do anything there, though, that's the right zoning. It's the only zoning in the county that works.
Right.
So that's good.
Well, I would like to think that we can get, sewer hooked up to that property.
Yeah. Especially if we have the sewer line running right next to it.
That makes sense.
Have a little deal.
Mm-hmm.
You can run your sewer by here if.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like, oh, I'm sorry, Seth, go ahead.
Well, it's just to clarify, so our understanding is there was not sewer currently running by the property,
Correct.
right?
Right, so with the Blue Mountain Station site, we have a lift station. We have to pump sewage uphill. It goes under the highway into this industrial park where it joins the regular sewer system. But the city is going to be extending a sewer line down the railroad right of way in the future that would go right by this spot. So I was making a joke that can't we just hook on right there? I have no idea if that is accurate, but I was just saying, gosh, if it's coming right next to the place, why can't we hook up?
So their
We
long-term,
wouldn't have to have a lift station. It'd be gravity, probably.
they're meaning they're building a wastewater treatment facility in that direction?
They're building one about 3 miles down the highway to the west. Yes, down
Okay.
valley. Yeah. We have to upgrade our plant, and so they're looking at some sort of a more natural infiltration system in addition to more treatment. I think they're talking, I don't know for sure, but talking about locating a new treatment plant at that site also. Because the old one is pretty antiquated.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's things going on in the sewer world, Seth.
Good. That's always important. That-
It is.
But I like the idea of either partnering with the developer or, getting it to the point where it is a desirable property to purchase for that, not us per se owning the housing and looking for renters or purchasers to buy individual lots, but coming up with a project that's shovel ready to either work with a partner like JMS Construction like Pasco is doing, or turn it over to a developer or something like that. So something along those lines.
Well, and they usually say that the price of land is one of their big barriers, so if there was, reasonably priced land with utilities, we could help with that, I think that would make it attractive.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, I think the port could do a lot to get it shovel ready and then with a development agreement, perhaps ensure that the type of housing, the type of development that goes in is appropriate and beneficial for the community.
Right. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
And when we talk about workforce housing, do we imply medium to low income?
I don't.
I think it's probably. I don't know if I would say low, but that the. Wages of the county. Can meet the price of the housing.
Right.
Mhm.
I think that's what I don't know. Do you guys know?
If there's a definition for that.
Market
Google
rate.
it.
Most of the time, when we see workforce housing with port developments particularly, they are centered around something that the port is developing to provide commerce. and attract-
Understand.
Yeah,
Understand.
so for instance, Port of Everett, who sold to a developer, and that developer, excuse me, partnered with a developer on their Waterfront Place property. And that whole development was centered around economic, vitality and commerce.
Mhm.
But they're definitely not low-income housing. Definitely not.
You have mentioned that.
Now, the Port of Bellingham, on the other hand, sold to a nonprofit that is doing a portion of the housing that is low income.
Hmm.
So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can slice it.
Right.
Jenny, it looks like you had something.
Yeah, it says, this is Wikipedia, workforce housing is a term that is increasingly used by planners, government, blah, blah, blah. It is gaining, let's see, workforce housing is generally understood to mean affordable housing for households with earned income that is insufficient to secure quality housing in reasonable proximity to the workplace.
So that implies low.
Mhm.
Well, but if it's earned income,
Right, right, okay,
with earned income,
okay,
so it's going to be,
okay,
yeah, not no income.
all right, yes,
Earned
no,
income,
no,
yeah.
I
We're looking
wasn't.
we're looking to build
Yeah.
housing that people can afford off of the wages that they're making.
Right.
Yeah.
that they bring
Yep.
in, and-
Yeah. They could be earning more than the average income in the area. It just could be that the housing isn't available. So
Right.
it really depends on the context. It gets used in larger urban areas where, Seattle and Portland, where the housing costs are prohibitive for folks that work in the harbors and industrial sectors of those communities. So they need the workforce housing because the market isn't providing it. But in a community like Dayton, it's a different story. There just isn't the housing that the workforce needs.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Good question.
Yeah.
Okay. Other comments, commissioners, or Seth, anything that you wanted to?
I
cover?
think there's a recommendation slide that's next, so maybe,
Oh,
yeah, so just again, hitting these points. You need to determine the availability of utilities and the timing, so that's some coordination with municipal partners, understanding those improvements and the timing of those improvements. To Abby's point, the development alternatives to maintain consistency with state law. And again, that's, there are tools available through transactions that, still can maintain some control over the long-term intent. And then ultimately, of course, just confirming alignment with the community and desires for how the port uses its resources and assets.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
thanks, Seth. One of the other items that we discussed last month and that the commission asked us to dig into a little bit more was looking at potentially purchasing a downtown building for perhaps an adaptive reuse or some other use. We spoke with the Port of Anacortes, which actually purchased a building in their downtown, excuse me, not a building, a whole block, as a buffer area between the downtown, which is kind of like your downtown in a lot of ways, except maritime. It has storefronts and restaurants and such, and the marine industrial area that the port basically kind of sits cheek to jowl with the downtown. What they shared with us were some significant takeaways, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. But there was a lot of money that needed to be invested and continues to need to be invested in that facility. It is a very old building. It's a lovely building, the Marine Supply and Hardware facility. But it's very old and they're having maintenance issues that because of the age of the building, because of its structure, because of what would be required to bring it to the historic standard, because both the buildings they own, but particularly the Marine Supply building, which is the one that they're dealing with at the moment, they're on the historic record. So they're required to do things a certain way.
Right.
Additionally, the community really, really loves these buildings and they have very high expectations for the investment that the port will make. So they've been quite resistant to changes to the building facade or any kind of demolition whatsoever. So that's been a hurdle for the board to be able to make changes to it. They are working with the local housing authority to perhaps do an adaptive reuse for some residential with a clawback clause that allows the port to then take that back if it's not being used for workforce housing, actually was the specific term that they used. Their recommendations for a port considering something like this would be to really work hard before you even purchase something or attempt to purchase something to determine the business case and the feasibility of how it would be reused.
Right.
Really important to have a plan. Coordinating with legal counsel with specific expertise again in this area, really, really important. And then plan for the assessment of the building. So they did a couple of assessments, but it was post-purchase. And those assessments really did open the eyes of the commission and staff to what was really needed. And yeah, they were just really eye-opening, I'll say. So. Any questions or thoughts or additional information that you would like to see?
Thank you.
I guess my thoughts is, as far as the downtown building, is it something we need to be very cautious if we approach that? It's appealing in a way, and it's really frightening in a way that we just end up with something that we're in over our heads with, and we're not meeting, community expectations with, and it just snowballed into something that's not great. But if there's a opportunity that would present itself, that, a building that would potentially be destroyed if we didn't step in and do something, and it was a historic building, then in a way, I kind of feel obligated to try to do what we can to preserve part of it, because it is important in our community for the economy, for the tourism, for the appeal of the town and everything, to try to maintain, what infrastructure we do have. So I'm kind of torn between the idea of pursuing a downtown building or not, but I think it's something we need to be very careful about, is it could potentially end up in a disaster.
Remain open with caution, maybe. Sorry, John.
Oh. I'm not saying, it's not my priority. Downtown building is not my priority right now. We have some other priorities I'd like to see, but if it was to move forward, I would do absolutely the recommendation for any of that. Because you get into a hornet's nest, and all of a sudden, your great plans turn into kibosh in a hurry. And then you're straddled with what and the liability of what. So those are some things that, and we have the same 100-some-year-old buildings, same type of cautions that I would definitely use for some of those, but always open to, as long as they hit the check marks of that, through the process. If it's feasible, definitely don't want to limit us and say, oh, heck no, we'll never go that direction, but it is one that probably has some sticky points there more than others.
So you both brought up the issue of historic buildings. When I drive on Main Street, all of past Dingles in this direction, the facade has not been kept historic. We've gone to, and I'm talking about like the extension office. And now what used to be the spa and Sun and Spa, or what was that?
Yeah.
See, those are no longer historic facades. And I would presume that the inside has never met any type of historic preservation requirements.
Well, I think that, I don't know this for a fact, but I think the behind Hair and Sun was so bad.
Tell me what that building is.
The hair
Oh,
salon,
okay.
I don't know if there was anything to say.
Yeah. So I don't know that that's an
I'm not
issue.
sure, yeah.
But again, I certainly agree that before anything is done, we do the business case and feasibility determination on anything like that before we proceed.
And one of the things that when we're talking about specifically downtown or the Dayton area, what we do is that area down there, is it, it seems like it's kind of stuck in the middle somewhere. Do we are we trying to cater to our community, or are we trying to cater to tourism? And we're not either one of them, a lot of times, especially downtown right now. That's how I feel. It's neither one way or the other. It's not a theme for the town per se. Well, I mean, we have our Christmas parade and stuff like that, but you'll see some of that in those tourist towns. There's a thing going on there, and we're kind of willy-nilly with that. And then you look downtown and there's a lot of like businesses like insurance and banks but not a lot of retail and stuff that would bring people other than just doing their business, right? So that's what I look at when I was like, what's gonna bring people to our downtown other than driving through it and going, hey, that's pretty cool. Okay, we checked that off the box. We did that. Type deal. So those are some things I think about on especially downtown portion.
Well, and I actually, when I mentioned earlier doing a business survey, that's one of the things I'd like to ask. Some of the businesses downtown, what do you need? Do you need more local shoppers? Do you need more tourism?
Yeah.
Or are you fine the way you are? You know, because I don't feel like the tourism is very strong at the moment. But I don't, you know, I don't know if that's what the businesses want.
Yeah.
You see, I don't know. So, and then as far as what you said about the other insurance and all that. I think for many rural towns right now, that's the way they're keeping their downtowns alive.
Yeah.
It is not attractive to tourists, but it keeps a storefront
Right.
full and somebody that paints the front and puts flowers out front, and
Yeah, exactly.
it's tough. And, you know, downtowns are tough right now. It's hard to know what the right thing is.
I'll be curious to see,
The
because,
results, I know.
yeah, my
I
husband
know.
and I have pondered that since we moved. Well, what
Mhm.
business could survive on Main Street?
Mhm.
And everybody shops online.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, I know, it's really hurt downtown.
so
Yeah,
I don't know what the answer is.
I know.
Yeah.
I
But I
know.
do know, I mean, there was a time, and we got some neighbors down the road here, there was a time that it was pretty desolate downtown. And over the last couple of years,
Yes.
they have really done a great job with it's vibrant. I mean, I think I was down there the other night driving through town, I'm like, damn, the place was packed. I mean, cars everywhere and I was like, what's going on here? Is there a special event? No, they're starting to, they have some retail stuff going on. They got some restaurants going on down there, so
Mhm.
it's clean, it's organized, and it's inviting. So those are some things, for sure would attract people, to come an hour drive,
That-
or a
that's it.
30-minute drive.
And that's a good point, because I was talking to a local Daytonite and she was saying, look at Waitsburg, they maintained all their historic buildings, and then she said, look at Waitsburg, and she said, and look at Dayton, we have not maintained, because back in the 80s, the attempt was not to go Alpine, but to go historic Dayton, you know,
Mhm.
and so, but we haven't maintained.
Well,
that
yeah, but-
historic.
One thing, yeah, but I think you're right, but one thing to remember, there's a difference, is that Dayton was one of the first communities to do a revitalization, so our Main Street revitalization is
30 years.
over 30 years
Yeah,
old.
yeah.
So it looks a little worn out.
Yes.
Waitsburg's was sooner.
Mhm.
Another thing that was not popular, I said this at an economic development meeting and it was extremely unpopular. But one of the people that helps the businesses in Waitsburg said their downtown businesses really understand and embrace the tourism effort, and they're kind of all on the same page. They're all rowing the boat in the same direction.
That's the other thing that I have heard is they communicate. And so they help each other out, because if I bring somebody in, it's going to help you out. And when you bring somebody in, it's gonna help possibly help me out. And that communication, yes, it's small, you know, but I think that is the key of where they're at today.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it was working its way, blowing down the wind
Mhm.
a few years back.
Mhm. Yes, yes.
Anyways, that's downtown stuff.
Is there anything more that we can do here to help you commissioners?
I think for that stuff, I mean, it's gonna take, it's bigger than us. It's, you know, it's the city, it's the downtown, commerce, it's the historical society, it's getting everybody to that table and say, all right, let's define who we are and what we want to do here, rather than everybody doing their own thing.
Yeah.
So that's probably, you know, it's a heavy lift, not saying it's not worth it. But it's gonna take a lot more than what's sitting in this room, that's for damn sure.
Good point. Okay.
So you're saying Dayton's having an identity crisis?
Isn't everybody?
I'm not.
No, they're
No.
good.
Thank you, commissioners. That was really helpful. Appreciate it. Well, speaking of how we're gonna bring folks to Dayton and Columbia County, as you may remember, we discussed industrial lands in the county last time. Commissioner Bryan, you're very interested in understanding for the existing conditions of industrial lands. And so Garrett and Seth worked on some information here that I think is really interesting and helpful. And so I'll turn it over to Seth.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. So on the topic of looking to attract and cite larger employers outside of the agricultural sector, there are somewhat limited options within the county overall and in Dayton specifically. So I think we talked about this at the last meeting, but this map sort of helps illustrate the small amount of industrial zone property within the entire county. So there in the county, there are about 3,200 acres, all located up in that northern section adjacent to Snake River. And our understanding is it's not served by power. So lacking a critical piece of infrastructure, or at least sufficient amount of power.
Yeah, it's not industrial power. Yeah.
Right. And then within Dayton, again, there's about 72 acres of zoned industrial within the city, two large-ish parcels there, and then one county zoned, two county zoned parcels to the northeast of the city. And our understanding is that those are impacted by natural resources. So yeah. Overall, very limited inventory of available industrial zone property. And it's a critical component to attracting manufacturing and industrial developers to the region. So this is an issue that's out of the port's direct control. Land use, of course, is purview of local municipalities in the county. So this is a broader topic for community engagement and sort of mobilization around land use in the region and the need to expand employment devoted land within the county.
Now, these maps were zoomable, weren't they, when Garrett was showing them to me?
Yeah, it's hard to have that functionality within PowerPoint. So
Okay.
I apologize about that.
But, and yeah, apologies for we wanted to make sure and show the entire county and the sort of the scope of what we're talking about. And that pink parcel at the top there is that larger parcel outside of the city, of course. And as we understand it, it's got a creek running through it. It's fairly large, but there's really no improvement to it. So
That's the Broughton Field along the Paddock, and the Paddock Creek runs right through it.
Right.
It's just a terrible spot to pick industrial land.
Maybe that's why they did it.
I
and to Seth's point, you know, the zoning is the purview of the city and the county. So there's partnership there. The other question that I think is interesting to think about in this venue is if the port wants to attract employers beyond what you have today, what are you looking to attract? And then what do they need? We've talked about this a little bit, right? And it all kind of ties together. So we've had the discussion about workforce, we've had the discussion about housing. We're going to talk about recreation, which is another area that's of interest to employers. And industrial lands, a very, very key portion of actually bringing folks to the community. So I guess if I may, Seth, jump into your world here for a second, but I'm curious what the commission wants to bring to Columbia County.
And before we move on, I want to remind you that what this industrial park is zoned is fringe commercial, which is basically like the city's light industrial.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, when I think about purchasing property, do we have cash flow? I mean, there's so much you'd have to take a look at before you'd even consider purchasing new land. So I'd be curious, we'd have to see whether you have enough funds to, feasibility on all of this is important. Until some of the rest of the assets are purchased outright, would we be able to afford purchasing any more land?
Right, because we didn't invest in the Blue Mountain Station property, so
Right.
as that would get paid off, then there'd be more capacity.
Right.
But yeah, that was, and then this industrial park was purchased in the eighties, so it was the same thing, it's called the Oliver Farm.
Right.
They borrowed money, took them time to pay it off and build buildings and,
Mhm.
Right.
but there is a lot of, in my opinion, there is value in considering where in the world more light industrial or fringe commercial or whatever you want to call it would be located.
Right.
And I think I told Seth this and I told her, I didn't tell you guys, but when Blue Mountain Station, when we wanted to add it to the UGA, because part of it was in the UGA and but not all of it. It was really weird. It was like a line went through and it didn't even follow a parcel line. Dayton's not growing, so the state doesn't allow you to just add urban growth areas. So there had to be a trade. But there was a bunch of land in the floodplain in the UGA, which isn't where you want to build. So they were able to do some swapping and add more of Blue Mountain Station into the UGA, and then that parcel that's up on behind the hill where the doctor was supposed to build up behind Syndicate Hill. So that's the way they got more UGA land, okay? So I don't know how it works with light industrial. I don't think you have to trade. But it might be a bargaining chip to say, hey, we've got this giant light industrial piece on the paddock that's really not buildable. It's not available and it's not buildable because of the creek. Where else, Columbia County Planning Commission, where else do you think there should be light industrial zone?
I think it's important to have available inventory for when businesses do come and ask for it, that they're required to have light industrial, and they can't necessarily operate in a general commercial zone and have to have industrial zone property. I think as part of planning for the future 20, 50, 70 years out, if we don't have any inventory now, how are we going to accommodate future growth? And if we're cut off at the knees and our hands are behind our back and we're just watching businesses, go elsewhere and find other counties to operate in, then it's painful. So I think that the idea of being able to get some property, either rezoned or swapped out or something along those lines, like Jen and I were talking about the other day, maybe we need to talk to the planning commission and make a presentation before them and see what we could do.
I've talked to them about it before, always in the comp plan process, but not, not with a lot of our own detail, which this is helping us have.
Right.
Yeah, because I think any of this, it's not our sole responsibility. It's not the board's sole responsibility for this community. We're a piece of the pie. And so what is our role? How can we, and then what are the other entities gonna bring to the table to make it a unit kind of effort?
Yeah, well, you can't do anything until that land is zoned,
Yeah.
and that's out of your
Right.
control. But to your point, you can share your vision,
Mhm.
talk with your partners at the city and county, go to the planning commission, have those discussions during the comp planning, which I know you do. And come to a point where everybody sort of says, yeah, that's the path forward, and move on it together,
And talk to the community, the people who live here and
what they want
the
to see.
people that pay those taxes to put all this stuff in there, what are they looking for? So that's a huge part of this pie in the direction that we go.
We wouldn't even have to necessarily own it though,
Right.
at least if it was zoned.
Exactly.
Exactly.
We don't have to own it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Point. So sorry, we kind of went on a tangent there. Did you have some additional comments here?
Not really. It's kind of a short story. I mean, if you're looking to attract industrial developers, you need the zoned land and there isn't much of it. So there's kind of a process in front of the community to get that land made available, zoned, converted from other uses.
And infrastructure.
Correct.
Yeah, that's that lower barrier to entry that we've talked about, right?
Mhm.
Like one of the reasons Blue Mountain Station is so successful, low barrier to entry for those businesses. It's the same thing for developers.
Hmm.
Thank you, Seth. Recreation, we were last here, we talked a little bit about some interest in recreational opportunities. Just looking at it, kind of understanding what is out there right now as far as what ports are doing and what ports are allowed to do. And there were some specific interests in local areas, recreation areas mentioned as well. Just to start out though, Washington ports are authorized to do recreational activities. They tend to be a little bit of both of these things. They tend to be connected to a port use. So you see them with, which you've seen them at marinas, trails, public access to waterfronts. There are often partnerships. So for instance, Port of Kamas-Washougal, which is in your memo, they have a partnership with Park County and have several parks that they actually own the land, I believe, and Park County maintains them through an agreement. And public recreation it seems it's an interesting connection to make, but it really does support economic vitality in the way that it attracts employers because their employees are looking for recreational opportunities, and it can be big or small. It can be just access to those recreational opportunities, but to attract workforce and employers, you want to look at how recreation supports them and the quality of life for your residents. So before we go into recommendations, we had several examples. One of the, probably the most consistent with the Port of Columbia is the Port of Whitman County, which has Boyer Park and Marina. As I understand it, Lions Ferry Marina is owned by the Corps and maintained by the port with a private concessionaire. So you sort of have a system there that you have. So Port Whitman County has, again, it's waterfront access, so public access to the Columbia River for you guys. You have a marina, which is also public access, I understand, right?
Yeah, Snake River,
Yep, Snake River, thank you. And you have
stored restaurants,
Star
RV park.
Restaurant, RV Park, yep, so you have
Now
public
cabins,
amenities.
cabins.
That's right, yes,
Yeah.
there's been a lot of investment made in that asset, and I know we're gonna talk about that soon. But there are a number of other things, so what you saw in your memo, there were parks, there are trails, there are the recreation area, Bishop Recreation Area, which is a very interesting case for Quincy. They had purchased, or excuse me, they had leased some property from the Bishop family for many years, and they ended up purchasing the property surrounding it and preserving it as a public access area. So really interesting and kind of unusual case. But there were some great news stories around that if you're interested in more of the history of the Bishop Recreation Area. So long story short, ports do recreation. They have a public access port asset nexus typically, and are often our partnerships as well, because it can be it's a little bit outside of a port's purview to maintain a lot of recreational areas. So that's where the partnerships often come in. So recommendations. So there's a couple of things that are important to keep in mind. The return on investment is really important. So as you know, commissioners, there is a requirement under state law to not give port funds essentially, right? So they have to serve the public purpose, and we can't give money essentially or give property or assets to a private purpose. So there needs to be a return on investment there. How recreational opportunities, as mentioned earlier, might drive private investment. So it might bring in employers and other private investments that can support the quality of life in the community. And then we discussed, what does the community want? What do they want to see? And how can we partner with those in the community to bring this to everybody?
Can I ask you a couple questions?
Of course.
So of course, the port or the marina for, in our case, you know, it generates revenue, so it works. And I've seen many of these examples you've given are generating revenue.
Mhm.
But what about the ports that just have a park? I mean, like the Port of Bellingham has that park next to, is it the Port of Bellingham? Oh, it was the port of, next to that,
Kalama.
Kalama. Yeah, I mean, that doesn't have any revenue.
So the Port Kalama is an interesting case. They do not have a tax, excuse me, they don't have tax levy.
Oh,
They are they're sort of called what's the word I'm looking for? Not an operating port, but the opposite, where they have
Okay.
the facilities, but there are private operators that actually operate the marine terminals and the different properties
okay.
around, and so they collect revenue in that way. So it's a different case.
But we,
Does it-
but we have revenue that isn't tax revenue.
True.
Lots of revenue.
Yeah.
So that could be used to, is that what you're saying?
No, it's just, wanting to make sure that we are thinking about how the Port Kalama is set up and
So
how,
it's
how they
different. Okay, I
invest,
didn't know
yeah.
that. Okay.
But, does the port itself generate revenue? Not necessarily. They also built, it's been probably 10 years ago, a big sports complex to the north and a little bit east of the Port Kalama proper. And that was a community investment. It's been extremely popular. The port does maintain it, but it was built, on revenues and not on tax revenue. To your point, though.
So,
doesn't really
yeah,
matter.
because so we could use non-tax revenue to
Sure.
pay for something that doesn't necessarily
Absolutely.
generate revenue. Okay,
Absolutely, yeah.
okay, I just
And
want to make that clear.
The
Okay.
important piece to, I remember, I think about this is, I'm gonna flash forward a little
Not that
bit.
I'm proposing it. by
No,
the way.
and
I'm just trying
there
to
are
make sure I understand it.
investments that ports make that don't necessarily generate revenue, but they support quality of life and commerce in other ways. Parks are an example of that.
Okay.
Now, the other thing is that Kalama is also developing some additional public amenities that will, I don't know if they'll bring in revenue or not, to be honest, but a cruise ship dock probably does, I would assume. And a public market adjacent to that park. So sometimes there's Springboard is another way to look at them, but that park's been there a really long time,
Okay.
forever. But yeah, so looking at sort of the mission versus margin, you know, is a recreational site gonna bring money, to offset the costs? Probably not. Most of them don't. But does it have a high benefit to the community? Yes. So is it, you know, where does it fall on that matrix?
And be attractive to employers.
Yes,
Okay.
that's the other piece.
All right.
So when you consider bringing tourism in, I mean, it's not the true benefits of it. It brings economic, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Funding into the
Economic
community.
vitality, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
We did get a comment on, a telephone comment on the comp plan related to recreation. It's from Marcine Hendrickson, and she said she thinks a trail from the Green Giant turnout, you know, the halfway down the Mount Station site, that would connect downtown to downtown for biking and walking would be great. So there you go, comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To further clarify the tax revenue piece, some ports have policies related to their tax revenues that specifically call out what they can be spent on. So that may not be the case for everybody, but for some ports, that's an important, and recreation may or may not be one of them. They set them by policy. So that was the reason I brought that up.
Okay.
Okay, we've talked a lot about money today. And funding opportunities was another area that we heard the commission express interest in. And so Seth is going to lead the conversation here about some of the important things to keep in mind. And then we're hoping to get a little more direction from you today on this, but I'll turn it over to Seth.
Thanks. So what we heard last time, and I think it's been consistent throughout, even as we've been putting the project together here, is identifying funding sources that line up with the priorities of the port and the projects, the investments, the capital programs that you're involved in and looking to kick off. So what we wanted to propose in order to not have kind of a scattershot approach to this would be to take a more strategic approach and identify those primary areas of priority and line those up with available funding. One of the commissioners, I think, expressed some concern about kind of winding up in a situation where grants become an end in of themselves and their requirements sort of dictate priorities for the port organization, and definitely want to see that flipped on its head, right? The grants are tools to help accomplish capital improvement and other improvement objectives, and taking a strategic approach to accessing them and implementing them. We've seen around the state, many ports take advantage of state and federal funding programs to grow and leverage one funding source for another to help grow and expand a program in a positive direction. So at the end here, what we're proposing is that we get a bit more direction from you on the exact focus areas that are your highest priorities, and then we'll go back to our database and resources and align those funding sources up, and then deliver back to the port a strategy for accessing and leveraging these grant programs, evaluating the different eligibility and accessibility considerations. So what are eligible activities, and do they in fact line up with port objectives? How competitive would the port be in pursuing something like that, especially considering the cost that can go into preparing a grant application or funding application? Aligning the timing of a grant with the timing of any of the identified priority projects. And we have a note here about working closely with grant managers. This is another important strategy in understanding how these programs are implemented, how the decisions are made, and how they're allocated, and who's successful. So that's something that we recommend as well. Understanding match so that the port can plan financially in advance of any commitments. Sometimes those are cash matches, sometimes they're in kind through FTE or other kind of asset devotion to a project. And then evaluating grants based on their size and the amount of effort to win them and staff time necessary to manage them, sort of a short return on investment. So that's the direction that we're headed with this. We think this is something that should be a sort of chapter or appendix to the comp plan when it's done, so that it's there to guide actions as it moves forward. And priority projects are lined up in concert with the funding strategy that's implemented by the port. So this is an approach that we've taken, and I would share kind of a matrix that we've developed for other port agencies, but they're kind of large and the scale doesn't lend themselves well to a shared screen. But this is an example that we can share from other recent port comp planning projects where we've delivered a funding strategy action plan at the end of the planning process that helps guide implementation of next steps. So I think what we'll do next time is come back and confirm with you that we have the right buckets, the right target areas for funding, and start to line up those funding sources that are available.
For reference, I'm sorry, excuse me. For reference, commissioners, in the memo that we sent, or that Jenny sent you, there are 5 key areas that we understood were to be the priorities. So economic development, infrastructure, transportation, housing, and then natural resources, open space, and recreation. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Thanks, Abby. Those didn't make the slide deck, but yeah.
I apologize.
Economic development will be a big fat one, I hope, and this infrastructure, we're better. I think I know a lot of those, but I can't wait to hear what see what you have, especially are the federal infrastructure packages far enough along that you will know what to provide? Do we know what they're gonna be offering?
We do know in some areas what they're offering and what their priorities are. Some of them are still, they're, I think they've got a 5-year life on them, so the money, they've been allocated in different tranches. The first one is out and allocated. I think the second one, maybe, I'll have to look back on the dates, but there's multiple tranches of allocation coming out of the various different infrastructure funding programs. So getting a handle on that, understanding the timing, that involves often working with state agencies that are implementing them, so commerce and ecology, in some cases DOT, depending on what you're looking at.
Public Works Board, probably.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that economic development is going to tie into probably a lot of the funding buckets, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think the sort of the subtopics within those would be, site planning and business recruitment for industrial development or, employment uses, potentially land or real estate acquisition, and management, and things around workforce development. In particular, it seems like those are the primary themes under economic development.
Great.
All right. Any additional comments or thoughts we should be considering, commissioners?
No,
No, there was one thing that I forgot to mention that I read out of here is that, they have short line planning grants. And I know that, and unfortunately, Mr. DeDelius is not here, but I'm curious whether he had ever considered a planning grant that provides a feasibility study, so to speak, on requests for additional money to improve your infrastructure. And because didn't he request a FRAP? What is that?
Yeah,
stand for?
freight rail,
He requested like $700,000 grant, but whether he was familiar with the short line planning grants.
I have to say, I didn't know there was a short planning grant.
Yeah.
I thought I knew them all, so.
I
So
mean,
DOT, well, I guess,
I don't know who the planning grant would be, but, okay, so this says, to aid these lines in developing stronger applications for programs like FRAP or that, we recommend the development of short line planning grants.
oh,
These small grants may be a subset of the FRAP program or in addition to it, so.
I think Paul is probably past that.
I know.
I mean, I've applied for FRAP. I've written FRAP grants. So I don't know if we would need planning funds to write one. They have such limited dollar amounts to them that for him, even asking for 700,000 is a lot.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
It's a good.
I think the average grants are about 350.
Uh-huh.
I would wish that could be useful for the federal grants. Those are the ones that are complicated.
Yes, right,
So complicated. Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Interesting. I guess Mr. Otto
so
can maybe add that to his fundraising matrix.
So back to the grants and something said in there that it was easier for an entity like us to get grants than private sector. Be interested to see what has been the challenge over the 15 or 20 years. Why are we in the situation we're in if it's easier to get grants?
Mostly because they're based on economic development. You gotta show that you're adding a new shipper. That's been our biggest problem.
So that
We've been
will
able to get
continue
money.
To be our
It
problem.
will.
Well, but part of Paul's lease is for him to get more shippers, you get to find more shippers. So it goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
implies more businesses here that.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that they mentioned in this, 93 page, whatever, cost benefit analysis. So right now he has one.
From Dayton.
One person from Dayton, yeah. So
Yeah.
if we continue looking at the development of the Blue Mountain Station and perhaps other people there who might have a need for
Mhm,
his rail.
mhm. That would be interesting, that would be something that definitely, if we're really truly want to keep the rail, is looking at things that would utilize
Right,
the rail.
exactly.
In our economic development as a.
Building a warehouse. along
Well,
the
it-
siding we have there at Blue Mountain Station.
Well, and the reason we have a siding out there is because I had a business that said they were gonna locate there.
Mhm.
Walla Walla, was it Salsa? That's how we got the money.
Mhm.
And then they backed out. And I called the state, and said, oh my God, what am I gonna do? They're like, it's okay, it's too, you got, it's there. They weren't gonna like make us go rip it up.
Right.
But that was the only reason we got it. That's why I say that's what it's about is
Right.
you gotta show. And then the bridges grant I got was because the line had been closed by Watco. So
Mhm.
the freight rail assistance program, that's what FRAP is. They will help you reopen a line or keep it from closing. So there's a couple of different, when you talk about the feasibility, there's a couple of different ways they will allow you to apply. So that was how we got that
Well,
money.
this article in Freightways is saying that part of the reason for the deal binge, all the selling of short line railroads right now. Is that infrastructure funds are flush right now. The promise of steady cash flows from long-term customer contracts. That short lines typically have make them a good candidate for those funds. So, you know.
They do have, contracts and with from scanning,
We just said, they're just so few that
Right.
made it very difficult, yeah.
And grants are hard for me to choke down. I know it's a necessary evil.
Yeah,
But
right.
even federal grants, when the federal government borrows $8 billion a day. Pretty hard to explain how we're getting money that we don't have. So eventually that's gonna catch up to us.
There's a lot of funding opportunities outside of grants, like this is
Yeah.
saying, along with buyouts, private equity is providing a source of growth capital for short lines for specific projects. Oak Tree Capital injected $450 million of equity into Watco, which operates 41 short lines. Private equity owners also benefit from an array of federal and state grants aimed at increasing rail access. The Granada Rail Line is tapping a $7.5 million US Department of Transportation grants along with Mississippi state funding.
Mhm.
So there's opportunities out there for private operators as well as, government entities that he should be able to, tap into.
So I got.
I think what I heard, Commissioner, is that you have interest in understanding how grants, maybe not directly for transportation, but other types of grants might support the utilization of that transportation asset. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to clarify.
Spot on.
Thank you. Okay, great discussion. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Commissioners. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
So just to recap, so the priorities that I've highlighted here in green are the ones we've not talked about yet. Heard from Jenny that she has interest in talking about Lions Ferry. And do you want to talk about it in May in advance of the June meeting or June when we're out at the marina?
Doesn't matter to me, whatever they prefer. I want to talk about it while we're out there, I'll look at the site and.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, which either way, whatever you guys
Like
prefer.
market out there.
Okay.
So maybe bring it to June.
Okay.
What specifically is of interest around the marina?
The marina is an interesting entity because we don't own it. The Corps owns it, which puts another dynamic in it, and then we lease it back out to another outfit to hopefully keep it, the vitality of it and for our community, and bring people in. So it's an interesting thing. Haven't got my head wrapped around it yet totally on how that works. I know it works. When I'm out there, people are there. In summertime, so I don't know what, other than what we're currently doing. I don't have an idea of what that would do. I don't know if we break even on that, or do we not break even on?
The goal is to break even. We're close. We're real close. Yeah, we make, and the lease is long-term, so we have rental increases built in.
Mhm.
So it has increased quite a bit since I took over. It was a real disaster when I started. And then, like I said, about the investment in the pull-through sites, that would again increase the rent. So we're close, and that's always been the goal. I think we get about 15,000 in lease revenue or a little more, and we pledge 20,000 a year for maintenance, but we don't always spend all of it. So that's why I say we're real close.
That's what I thought, is
Yeah.
we were right there.
Yeah, and then, and we do have a facilities, one thing we could discuss,
Mhm.
it's just an idea, it's totally up to you guys. But we did a facilities, master plan that talked about potential development there in the future, and that was before you guys, got elected. So we could look at those, we just got a drawing, we could look at that,
Mhm.
and I could share it with them, and some of it I think is feasible, some of it I think is really difficult, but it's got some interesting ideas on it that you guys are probably not fully even aware of. And this, and the pull through RVs are like part of that. They were a part, so we could do that if you, that interests you.
Yeah, could be that.
That was gonna be my thought, how much is undeveloped
Mhm.
in all of
Yeah.
that area? I don't know.
The other thing is, with that out there with our sister city Starbucks, how we can do something out in that area, what impact it makes to them. We're Columbia County, Board Commissioners. So yes, Dayton gets a lot of the attention, but the marina gives an opportunity for economic development within out there to help them as well. I know historically they've had bait shops and this and that that went along with what the recreation is out there. So I would like to continue with, I don't know what the options are, what our role is, but try to serve that community as well. Would be an interest of mine.
Thank you.
I don't know if we own any property out there. I have no idea other than leasing the.
We have 9-acre parcel adjacent to the grain growers facility on the river.
On the river,
Yeah.
yes, not in the town.
Not at the marina,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, on the river. Yeah. Mhm.
And it's I'll tell you what, the marina, besides their work campers that kind of travel around, the KOA work campers, they rely on Starbucks for employment, for employees, for
Yeah,
workforce. There's a good tie there. And when there's no store in Starbucks, sometimes the only place people there can buy milk and things is at the
Is the
marina,
marina.
so. But I am curious, Starbucks is my genetic homeland. That's where my father was born and my sisters. It's always interesting to know what Starbucks wants, though.
It
So
is.
I'm not always clear what Starbucks,
I
what
do
they
think that
want, what kind of involvement they want from people.
were they not revitalizing the rodeo grounds?
Yes, they are. I don't
Is
know
it,
what
is
the-
it happening?
No, not yet.
Oh, okay, because I heard about it,
But
but I
the word
didn't
is
see.
out
Nope.
that there was funding to do that, but I don't know when they're going to start that.
So
Yeah.
just, just some thoughts, I don't know what our role is in it, but, I don't want to overlook something that we have an opportunity to spread our influence or what we can do for our entire county to the best of the ability that we can.
And we did provide a startup grant, did we not, for, is that Rebecca?
No, it was Spinner's
That's right.
Spinner's Grocery. I think it was Spinner's Grocery.
That's right.
Oh, no. The startup was for the Starbucks Lodge, the
That's right.
one that Zoni and Deb are doing.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right,
Mhm.
yeah. And then broadband, there's the
Yeah.
superintendent of the Starbucks school is on our broadband action team and
Okay.
they're very interested. in- I think we just need to make sure the town is on board, but
Mhm.
they deserve some broadband attention.
Yes, it is.
Well, I think as far as recreation goes, we really have two major areas for recreation in our county. One is over there on the big river and the other one's up in the mountains, and most of the mountains is national forest land.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We don't have any control or say, or even anything to do with, so we kind of capitalize on what we have and use what we have, use what we got.
Thank you. The other three priorities that we've not touched on yet here on this list are the Rocky Industrial Park, sale of port assets, and general economic development, although we're certainly touching on that and everything else. So is there anything else here that piqued your interest for the next
You
workshop
mean beyond those or of those?
of those?
Oh,
Or
For the
beyond,
next
or beyond
workshop?
them. Yeah, or beyond them, if there's something that came up that you would like more information on.
How much land is left to develop on the Rock Hill Industrial Park?
Well, if we sell lots U and V, none.
Oh, okay, so that's it.
Yeah. There's a history, we owned all the way
Yes.
down to where McGregor is and that part's all gone.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's all taken care of.
Can I just ask what the protocol is for public comment? I don't know how it works for the workshop, so.
So typically with our workshop is our time to, well, do our work and discuss
Right.
in discussing the public comment period we have at the beginning of every meeting, at the end of every meeting, and that's where we like to take the comments for the workshops. That way, when we come to our workshop, we can, focus on
Right.
discussing things and whatnot. I'm trying to not get in a habit of opening the workshop itself up to a lot of public comment, because then we can just get carried away and not get a lot done. So ideally, we would like to, we welcome your public comments, anything that you have to say, but we would like to have it during the time of our regular public meeting. I don't have an objection, but I'll talk to the other commissioners and see if they have any objection, if you've got something to say, but I don't really want to start a precedent of using our workshop time
Understood.
for public comment.
And my concern would be that we published that there was no comment, so
Right.
we either need to decide there is or not, and then stick with it, yeah, to be fair.
Could you trade one of those public comment
Right.
times into
Pardon
the
me?
workshop to
It
the
could be, they
workshop?
can be sent in to it.
Yeah.
You want to keep it within the meeting.
Really would like to keep it within the meeting, because the workshops are really a time for us to be able to focus and interact amongst between each other and be able to.
Right.
We're not making decisions during this time. We're just talking things through and
Sure.
trying to get guidance and direction.
Or reach out to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can send emails anytime, doesn't have to be just during a port commission meeting, you can send me an email, send in a letter, whatever, and I'll gather it together and make sure they get it. Yeah.
Good to know.
We put that, did you see the press releases in the paper about the public comment? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we put it on Facebook, in a paid post.
This is just my first one here, so I just want to know what the protocol is, so, but now I know I'll save it for the meeting in public. comment.
Thank you.
Sure.
So one other thing that we would like to do, commissioners, before the next workshop is, so we're gonna do the research and like we typically do, but we also have in our scope and budget an opportunity to speak with each of you individually. And so we'd like to reach out to each of you and set up a short time for you to just, as we're sort of in the middle of this process, reflect, and you're chewing on it, you're thinking about it, reflect what you've heard, your priorities, anything that comes to mind outside of the workshops. Really just have a conversation individually with each of you to talk about this process and your thoughts and reactions. So we will, we look forward to that opportunity to speak with each of you, and we'll be reaching out very soon to set those up.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And our next workshop is May 10th, and we'll look forward to seeing you then.
Excellent.
Thanks very much.
And I will be on the road again, so I will be on the computer on
Okay,
May 10th. So my apologies, and I appreciate you being here.
thank you so much. Thank you, Seth.
Thank you, Seth.
Feel better.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
And with that, we will close the workshop at 46.
Thank you.
So how did they,
So was
do they have
that
a
in
typical
part?
action?
The Archbishop Family?